Okay, y'all. Something happened yesterday that I think everyone who cares about AI, ethics, and the future of technology needs to understand. And I mean everyone, not just people in tech, not just policymakers. Everyone. An AI company looked the United States Pentagon in the eye, said no, and accepted the consequences. And within hours, a rival AI company swooped in, took the contract, and insisted they got the same deal, while the government insisted they didn't. This is one of the most significant moments in the short history of AI development. And the anthropological questions underneath it about power, values, institutional pressure, and what it means to hold an ethical line are exactly what I want to dig into today. Let's break it down. First, the facts. Anthropic, the AI company behind Claude, had been the only major commercial AI lab whose models were cleared for use on the Pentagon's classified networks. That's a significant deal. Classified network access is a big deal in government contracting. But Anthropic had two conditions baked into their contract negotiations. Two things they said they would not budge on. First, their AI could not be used in fully autonomous weapons systems, meaning weapons that make lethal decisions without a human in the loop. Second, their AI could not be used for mass domestic surveillance of American citizens. Now, the Pentagon, operating under what the Trump administration has rebranded the Department of War, pushed back hard. Their position was that Anthropic's models should be available for all lawful purposes, full stop, no carve-outs, no exceptions written into the contract. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that they could not in good conscience agree to those terms. The Pentagon gave them a hard deadline of 5:1 p.m. on Friday, February 27, 2026. That deadline passed without a deal. Within hours, President Trump ordered every federal agency to immediately stop using Anthropic's technology. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth designated Anthropic and this is a real term with serious legal weight, a supply chain risk to national security. That designation has historically been reserved for foreign adversaries. This is the first time it has ever been applied to an American company. And then, hours later, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman announced that his company had reached a deal with the Pentagon with the same two limitations Anthropic had requested written into their agreement. The Pentagon accepted from OpenAI what it refused to accept from Anthropic. Nobody has been able to fully explain why yet. So here's where it gets anthropologically interesting. Because on the surface, Anthropic and OpenAI ended up in the same place. Both companies say their AI shouldn't power autonomous weapons or mass domestic surveillance. Same principles. Same red lines, as Altman himself called them. But the way they got there, and what it cost each of them, reveals something profound about institutional power, values, signaling, and what it actually means to hold an ethical position when there's real pressure on it. Anthropic tried to have their limitations written explicitly into the contract language. They wanted it legally codified, not just a policy commitment, but a binding contractual obligation. OpenAI, by contrast, agreed to let the Pentagon use its technology for all lawful purposes, and then noted that its safety principles were reflected in existing law and policy. The restrictions are real, OpenAI says, but they're embedded differently. What's the anthropological read on that difference? Anthropic was trying to create a new institutional norm. They were saying the existing law hasn't caught up with what AI can do. Mass surveillance of Americans using publicly available data, social media posts, geolocation data may technically be lawful today, and AI supercharges that capability in ways the law didn't anticipate. We want the contract itself to close that gap. OpenAI's position, as described by Altman, is that existing law and policy are sufficient guardrails, and that their deal reflects those existing protections. Critics would say that's a more politically expedient position. Supporters would say it's a more practically effective one, because it actually gets them in the room. And here's the part that should make everyone pause. The Pentagon accepted from OpenAI what it refused from Anthropic. The stated principles are nearly identical. The outcomes, at least on paper, look similar. But Anthropic lost its contracts, got labeled a national security risk, and is now taking the government to court. OpenAI got the deal and a public endorsement from the Defense Secretary. That asymmetry is the story. And it has very little to do with the ethics of autonomous weapons. From an organizational anthropology standpoint, what we're watching is a clash between two fundamentally different models of how a technology company relates to institutional power. One model says, engage with power, work within existing structures, accept the compromises that come with operating inside powerful institutions, and use that access to shape outcomes from the inside. That's OpenAI's apparent approach. It's pragmatic. It's politically legible to the Pentagon, and it comes with real costs, including the cost of being seen as more willing to accommodate. The other model says there are values that are non-negotiable, and the integrity of those values depends on having them formally, contractually protected, not just trusted to existing law or goodwill. That's Anthropic's approach. It is a harder line. It costs them enormously. And it raises the question of whether principle without access actually changes anything on the ground. This is not a new dilemma. Anthropologists and organizational theorists have studied this tension for decades across industries, from pharmaceutical companies negotiating with the FDA to human rights organizations deciding whether to engage with authoritarian governments, to tech companies deciding whether to operate in markets with authoritarian restrictions. The scholar Albert Hirschman described it as the choice between exit, voice, and loyalty. Exit is what Anthropic effectively did. They walked away. Voice is what they'd been trying, staying at the table and pushing for change from within. Loyalty would have been accepting the Pentagon's terms without resistance. Each option has costs and consequences that ripple far beyond the immediate decision. What makes this moment historically significant isn't just the AI angle. It's the precedent. The designation of an American company as a supply chain national security risk for refusing to remove contractual protections from a government contract is something legal scholars and policy experts are calling unprecedented and potentially chilling. If that designation stands, what does it mean for any company that wants to negotiate ethical constraints into a government deal? That's a question with implications that extend far beyond AI into pharmaceuticals, defense, manufacturing, research institutions, and anywhere else where private entities try to hold ethical lines in negotiations with government power. Let's get real for a second. This story is still unfolding. Anthropic has said it will challenge the supply chain risk designation in court. OpenAI's deal is new, and the details aren't fully public. We don't yet know what the legal resolution will be or what precedent it sets. What we do know is that the companies building the most powerful AI systems in the world are being forced, right now, to make decisions about what they will and won't do under real political and financial pressure. Anthropic's position, whatever you think of how they handled it, was this: the law hasn't caught up with what AI can do. And we won't sign away the right to say so. That's a principled stance. It costs them a lot. The question I want to leave you with is one that goes beyond AI. When values and power collide, when holding an ethical line has real institutional costs, what do we owe to principle? And who decides when the compromise is worth it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This one deserves a real conversation. I'll see you in the next one.